In episode 5, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Carl Valle and talking about technology and how education around technology is probably not as robust as it could be. And this goes for professionals working in sporting environments looking for technology to help them, as well as the people from the technology companies looking to get their technologies out to professionals. And if technology is treated like a tool, it's not just about getting the best tools, it's also about learning how to use those tools. And I think that's where the deficit lies these days is the knowledge around how to make the best choices around your technology, as well as how to implement the technology and make it a sustainable part of your practice. So I think you'll get some really interesting takeaways from Carl's opinions on technology and how he uses it in his everyday practice as a consultant and professional. Hey, Carl, good to have you on. I just wanted to, have somebody talk about technology and how it relates to the education that people are going through right now, whether they're in a sport-related field, rehabilitation, and how they're using technology. Because as I see it, there really isn't a lot of education around how to not only choose your technology, but then how to integrate it into your system and how to make sure that it's chosen in a way that it's sustainable and that it actually is, providing results for you and making you a better practitioner. So I think one of the reasons that I wanted to jump on this call is I know that you're involved in helping people choose the right technology and vetting different technologies. That's what you spend most of your day doing. So right off the bat, what are some of the first things that you really have to kind of target in terms of working with somebody and saying, okay, why are you buying this technology? What is it going to do for you? And can I help you pick something a little more appropriate for your situation? What are those conversations like?
Yeah, the conversations they're getting more complex, more extensive, and the definitions of what technology really is confusing. Because if you look at technology and say use the word tool or equipment, it becomes very nebulous. So when I hear teams saying, "Well, we want to have the best technology," I always say, "Do you want to have the right technology?" Because technology is only as strong as its weakest link. And if you have an organization that feels that the management and ownership is pushing a certain technology for an agenda, it's going to self sabotage. So the conversations of acquiring technology, integrating technology, budgeting for technology, vetting the right technology so that you know what's useful. Sometimes things are lacking a little bit of accuracy, but they're very practical because they're reliable. So the discussions are getting more and more about how we can use technology to make our jobs easier. It used to be, well, what's the new fresh data? What's the new oil? It used to be player tracking. It used to be some sort of medical data. Now it's becoming more of like, okay, how can we make the user experience better? I mean, I remember years ago when we started using Zoom, that was a major milestone because video conferencing was less accessible, was very complicated. Sometimes it was expensive. So I think technology, the definition is going to change because as we get into artificial intelligence, more and more sensors, it's going to be more of a challenge rather than a resource.
Yeah, because I would, we talk about equipment versus technology, and I'm sure there's some strength coaches out there that think a squat rack is technology, which it could be, characterized as to some degree. And some of the squat racks they have nowadays can measure stuff and have variable resistance and all these fancy things. But at what point do you, sit people down and say, look, this is just too much for you. This is just, I know what you're trying to do with this purchase and you're trying to make it look like you're ahead of the game, or ahead of the curve. But at the same time, how is
Yeah.
this going to be used? Like, are you really going to benefit from this? Could you benefit more from maybe, knowledge technology, in terms of like getting your staff up to speed on how to, do different things, right? Do you have those discussions a lot on where their investment goes?
Yeah, Yeah, so there's principles that I have is, most people think about when they look at a technology budget, for example, they have to start thinking the same principles of regular equipment. Do you have a sustainability solution? Repairing, education's a big part of it. Are you putting a dollar for every dollar you put in? Do you put 10 cents into at least education to not only make sure you can use it properly, but you're up to date with the purpose behind the technology. So a great example is a lot of the foot sensors that we're seeing out there. Everyone's wanting to buy a lot of this IMU wearables. And I said, are you familiar with the anatomy and clinical understanding of the foot and ankle? And a lot of the strength coaches that are buying this stuff, they want the data to make sure that their value increases, but they're not able to provide the value back. So, like for example, strength and conditioning, a lot of people are interested in barbell technology, whether it be resistance, whether it be measurements such as bar speed and the barbell path. But I don't see better technique on the clean and snatch than I did 10 years ago. In fact, I see a decrease in coaching, a decrease in technique. And a lot of that is because the modern strength coach has to be a sports scientist, so they're basically diluting their capabilities because you're only one person. And while I believe that there is career growth, there's only so much you can do as an individual. So those are some conversations that I'm having, which is, are you growing your staff because you're not growing your hours? If you're putting in dark to dark hours of 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, technology is actually a burden. And like sports training, you put in a pound to get an ounce. Technology needs to be the reverse. It should be almost like a magic pouch where you put in a dollar and you get $3 back. So there's great thresholds, Derek. Another example is, are the athletes annoyed by it? Having great technology sometimes is used as recruiting, right? But then when you're actually in there training and you're punching a tablet and the app is crashing, or you do an all-out sprint and the data collection doesn't work, or you're trying to log into the app to do your wellness questionnaire and it's kicking you out, that's not really helping. So those are the real world things with technology, and it's not getting better.
Yeah, and we can look to the Super Bowl where we have two teams where I know one team for sure doesn't use GPS, hasn't used it for a long time, and one of the reasons is the head coach didn't find any use for it. And then the other team, there was a famous video of I think it was Buddy Morris asking him, we're in the red here, which and the coach didn't care. He didn't care what was happening with the GPS. So you have two successful coaches in the Super Bowl now who haven't adopted that technology and they're still successful. Is that something that should be of concern to technology companies?
No, I think it's a concern because innovation comes with some pain. I think they need to be realistic and honest about it because, you know, like American football is probably the worst sport to do player tracking. Think about it. It's a giant ruler. It's literally measured on the field. The players usually play one side. A lot of the plays are choreographed, right? Um, and the sport's defined by, while it does have overtime, there's a kind of constraints. It's not like baseball where you just have innings that can keep going. So in terms of player tracking, that's a good point. It's like, okay, the when you have the probably the best quarterback in the league, you know, that's such an impact position. Does it really matter the amount of workload of a running back, especially even in practice, because practices are not, you can't do small sided games in American football. It's not like they're playing indoor arena, Wednesday through Thursday. It's very difficult to add value to, minutes and effort, even heart rate. I mean, you can get a lot off of very simple data. And in order to move the needle, you have to put exponentially more information that's useful. And unfortunately, a lot of the products are just finding more and more ways to do the same thing. And it really isn't evolution, or innovation, it's iteration. So yes, there's a long way to go with all of these sports technology companies. A lot of them assume that because they have a measurement that they're going to be valuable. And measuring is the first step. Convenience, speed, width, insight. Those are the things that make technology wonderful. But it is a responsibility. And a lot of the design and a lot of the engineering of these products are being done by the wrong people. They don't know what it's like to be an athlete. They don't suffer. They don't eat their own dog food. So if they're not using their own products to do their job, which I don't think a lot of these companies are, it's not like, oh my God, the vice president of marketing, he's out today, his player load's too high. No, they really don't use their own equipment. So that's why the perspectives and hiring former sports scientists or having liaisons and education, yeah, that does some damage control, but it's not really making the solution much better.
Yeah, and if we take it from the point of view of the technology company CEO, and if you are giving them advice, are you bringing up all these practical issues around their use of their technology, whether it's a wearable or whether it's some sort of measuring device? Are you saying like, listen, in order for this to really take off, it has to be easy to use. The players have to buy in, the coaches have to buy in, and there's all this soft stuff that they haven't thought of that you have to bring up.
Yeah, the biggest complaint I have is that sending people equipment, especially consultants, you included, it isn't helping. One of the biggest problems I have is a technology company goes, "Hey, we have this piece of equipment. We're going to send it to you, and we want your feedback." Well, I'm sorry, I need a year because you usually want to try to think about how can you use this product over a season, and how does it fit within everything I'm doing. Barring something or being something sent out for 6 weeks, it's very thin the information you're going to get. You're going to see some promising ideas, but it doesn't really help create enough depth and anchoring so that you can really make an impact. So that's the first thing I would say is stop with the superficial stuff and really start doing some R&D. So put the money into working with either an organization, a few teams, and shut up for about 3 to 6 months and not try to guide them or check in. Just let them do it and then learn from there. That's something very important. Second is education. Be careful. People are not looking for webinars anymore. We all have Zoom fatigue. Coaches want more immersion. So I think more roundtables and workshops are probably a better fit than having someone narrate a PowerPoint. If you can be, sometimes there's some conveniences to have something on demand, but education is because people have been displaced from coronavirus. I think people are looking for something a little bit more interactive. So start there. That's on the second part. And then the last part is remember what it's like to be the team. When a team has to deal with an array of different responsibilities, they think about their product only. A lot of times people are using multiple systems and how that integrates. So the integration of technology needs to be considered, not just, hey, look at our product. It's the best in its class. Focus on it. We're the top of the totem pole. Think about the entire totem pole and think about how it interacts.
Yeah, that's a good point because there is this sort of divide between like, hey, you can just wear this and it'll measure everything. And it kind of does it okay. Or that you can start compartmentalizing, go like, I'm going to get the sleep monitor and I'm going to get the heart rate monitor. And then I'm going to strap a GPS onto me. And then I'm going to get this other thing that
Yeah.
measures EMG. So at what point do you say, I want the best measurement of this specific technology versus I just generally want to know, so I'll opt for that. Do you get into those kind of discussions with clients?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things is I'm quote playing with this, meaning they get a sensor or a piece of technology and they do a little bit of home experimentation. And that's fine. I mean, the first thing you want to do is try it yourself. Pretend like you're the athlete, right? Or you're the patient and experience it. Then you want to try it on someone else to see what the interaction is between yourself and the athlete or patient. And then you start doing a small group and then maybe expand to a team or a school. So that's a good process. The question is where to start with. The biggest problem I see is if you don't have a great culture, I hate to use the word, but if you don't have at least some sort of internal philosophy or structure of how you're supposed to communicate, then what happens is technology only makes the problem worse. So, like for example, if you're going to work with a soft tissue therapist in a pro team or a really good college, a lot of them have body workers or massage therapists or soft tissue therapy or whatever. If you can't do a wellness questionnaire, how are you going to organize, all this information on treatments? Same thing with physical therapy or athletic trainers. You have to have a platform to communicate. That's the first thing, so that you can create a way to collect information, push out information. Do that first, communication platform. Then you start adding the layers of technology that are more measurement. But if you can't do that, if you have a problem communicating, then what happens is when you add the tech, it becomes a friction point or a barrier rather than a way to improve outcomes, reduce headaches. So if technology is not embedded and it doesn't help you and it becomes a responsibility, then it better be providing so much information that you are transforming the game. Like, where's the 400 hitters? Where are the, right? Where are all these, where's the evolution in baseball? I see some players are getting better, but we don't see anything that is transformative with the technology. It's usually just incrementally adding details, which is nice, but the quality of a TV going from 4 to 8K isn't going to make sure. I mean, there's a point where the eye isn't going to find much more value. So that's why I think I'm really concerned about when everyone comes together, everyone has little agendas that they have in terms of what technology should do for them, when it should be athlete centric and saying, are we doing what's ethically right? Examples, concussions. We're seeing a drop in concussion preparation with, for example, neck training. When COVID testing becomes more of an importance, what's going to drop? Other testing. So now we're seeing people that are clearly not doing their job on neck strength and to reduce concussions because they're spending their time doing swabbing of the mouth. So I'm not saying that because of COVID, it's going to increase the amount of concussions, but it's really difficult to have a sustainable solution when you don't have a clear plan, including, like, for example, you mentioned sleep. Okay, what happens if you have bad sleep? One example I've been seeing is people moving away from wearables for sleep. Not to say that that's a good solution, but when you start measuring the bed, it makes it a lot easier, especially with sports that are like American football, where you spend most of the time at home. That's probably a lot more convenient than worrying about, for example, taking off a ring when you're supposed to be lifting. And then you lose the ring, and then it becomes a big problem to replace it. So I think what we're seeing now is that the realities of technology that aren't as exciting as the white papers are starting to surface.
Yeah, and I guess one of the questions, or a bunch of the questions I have for you, is like, people want to hear from you, like, what technology should I get? Like, if they are, entering a new position, a new job, and they have a budget now, and I know it's gonna, you're gonna ask the question, well, what do you want to measure? What's important to you? But are there some things that jump off the page for you in terms of technologies? Like, if, for instance, if we say timing systems, people are always talking about what's the best timing system, and what are some of the things that you're looking at when a team comes and asks you, like, hey, we want to time our athletes, we want to get more data on their speed and their, what are some of the things that you're addressing in that question?
So I think that's a good point. Timing, speed kills. We all know that there's a value there. The first thing I'm looking at is, okay, what are you doing now? Because what you do now is pretty much the realistic expectation of trying to improve it incrementally. If you're not doing anything now, the question is, are you trying to get something to keep up with the Joneses? Or do you need something maybe a little bit more intermediate so that you can have a better appraisal of what's going on? Best example is the difference between continuous laser, which is a laser like a radar gun behind the athlete, so you can see their continuous speed, and then timing gates to see split intervals. Split intervals, I mean, they're useful. I believe in them and I use them, but like, it's 2021. You know, we can get continuous velocity because you can do a lot more things with that. So, I've pretty much stopped using split intervals because I need that richness of things such as floating sprints. If max speed is so important, why not the best workouts for max speed? And that could be floating sprints. But to see those little subtleties of surges and velocity, you're not going to get that from timing gates. And then when you're an athlete and you see all these tripods out there looking like a corridor, no one wants to experience that. So they're running tightened up, and that's why free lap is popular, because it's a tiny cone. It's barely noticeable visibly. Um, then there's also people using, like I said, the player tracking equipment to try to get an understanding of decelerations, total work being done by estimating through velocity and body weight. I mean, those are nice, but how are you using that real time? Post game analysis or post session analysis, it's usually confirming what you kind of know. Um, you can tell when someone gets beat in the football, pretty clearly when they don't tackle the athlete and there's a touchdown scored. So does it really matter that they went 21.2 miles an hour? Or the fact is your defense isn't fast enough? So I think that's something to be said. So yeah, timing, it's timeless, but what you do with it, we're seeing a lot of deceleration emphasis right now. Some really nice things coming out for change of direction, step-by-step analysis, contact times. That is the future. Not, hey, here's your flying 10. I mean, that's great for 1984, but that's not really helpful now when you can see why they're running fast, not just how fast they run.
Yeah, and just jumping into that piece there, you talked about deceleration and ground contact times, and like you had touched on before, we have people developing in shoe technology to give us data versus the old school. Well, I'll say it's old school, but the force plate in the lab in the facility. Is there room for both of those? Is one still better than the other? What's the practicality of having people wear insoles or shoes and pulling the data from those? What has been your experience?
Oh, this is ugly. How can I say this in a constructive way so it doesn't sound like I told you so? So that's good. That's a good question. You have actually multiple questions. Legacy equipment like force plates are they're still valid. They might be changing, meaning you might be getting a more creative way. For example, the isometric mid thigh pull was a discussion that was occurring in the last couple of days with athletes that are not used to using straps, weightlifting straps. If you've never touched a bar, right? Let's say you're a young athlete, 16, and you haven't done any formal weight training, an isometric mid thigh pull isn't a good idea because there's a familiarization and a learning effect that you have to do, and it takes multiple reps and multiple sessions to really tease out that information. Second is in-shoe technology. Let's be careful. The first thing that concerns me with in-shoe technology is comfort. A lot of these products are invasive. You feel it in the shoe. It feels like there's a little bit of a pebble. You're slipping around. That's not really a good user experience. But getting information on the shoe, maybe you don't do it every day. Maybe you profile them or you screen them out. So there's ways to use technology without having those type of problems.
Yeah, and again, I'm always thinking, like, if you talk about user experience, there is a user experience on the side of the person collecting the data, and whether it's collecting shorts, that have sensors in them, collecting,
Yeah.
the insoles or the shoes, and obviously they have the GPS units. That's going to take a lot of time, effort, and resources to compile data that, again, we're not sure how it's going to be used.
Yeah, like a lot of the smart fabrics, first of all, they're environmentally a problem. Second, they wear out. Even if you do cold washes by hand, all its salt and from the sweat is corrosive. So, like, if you're using it, the more likely that the product's going to break down. And then there's the other practical side is that, okay, while it's drying by hand, what if you want to do a second session? The next day session, you got to wait for it to be managed. And then, sometimes the contact areas, you still need to use a tailor. I mean, we keep forgetting that their clothes are still in a very old technology, if you will, just maintaining a waistband and making sure the seams are double stitched. So a lot of this stuff is not easy to manage. The wireless wearable EMG, not a fan. Um, if you look at the sampling and the electrode placement, and
Yeah, why
it's
here's
it's
something.
great.
Why is sampling rate important? Explain to people why the sampling rate is important for a lot of these wearables.
So that's a good point. Is the sampling rate allows you to get more of a richer information of what's going on, because a lot of these sporting activities are very ballistic in nature. So if you don't have a high enough sampling rate, you can't have with confidence knowing what's going on at what time. So for example, when you're sprinting, you're taking 5 strides per second. Well, that's a fast ballistic activity. And if you can't keep up, then the information, what's going on within each stride, is going to be guesswork. So it's really important to make sure that you know, and this is where sports scientists need to help out more, is to say, hey, what can you get out of what we have? And where does it need to be so it's useful? Not just saying, well, this is not valid. Great. Well, what's going to happen in a year? You need to make sure that there's a community. Now, the International Sports Technology Association is doing that. Unfortunately, the sports tech companies are tend to be rogue in a wild west, because there's not regulation and it gets messy. It's not like the FDA is going to have to look at like the next sports tracker. So I think with all of this, it's important to understand that this is a very messy environment. And in order to make steps forward, we have to have better standards of saying, okay, this is acceptable here, not appropriate there.
Yeah, and just listening to you talk about all of the time and effort and the durability of some of these wearables, and it makes me think back to some of the conversations we've had about video technology, and maybe combining that with artificial intelligence so that the video pulls the data that you need, so you don't have to have, interns running around collecting things and uploading and downloading. So what can we expect? I mean, basic video technology is very useful for ground contact times and biomechanics and seeing all that. But what can we expect for the future, for video
Yeah,
technology to extract everything for us?
video is nice. The problem with video is that, you're running around with, you know, sporting apparel. And so a wrinkle or a sleeve, that changes, and the artificial intelligence behind the video might not be able to really give an accurate depiction of what's going on. So an athlete that's running 2 or 3 tenths faster, a 10.4 athlete, or even down to a 9.9, might be a degree and a half change in some sort of measurement, and the video might not be able to pick it up. So video is really excellent for player tracking, for distance and some velocities. But biomechanics, it's still difficult because it's all about setting up the cameras. There's a stadium. What happens? You go to a practice field. What about a bubble? Cameras are useful. I use video analysis, very simple video analysis, but the combination of sensors and technologies to get like ground contact time. If you're spending all this time trying to collect ground contact time manually, very ineffective way to get a measurement that you can get through other technologies. Video needs to be the foundation to displaying a lot of the force and the these other measurements like kinematic and stride parameters. Um, and I like simple video because it's very useful. Unfortunately, because everyone has a video camera, everyone thinks they're a videographer, and it's usually done improperly. So just education on simple video is necessary. Second, um, I do think that the future is going to be richer because remote coaching has improved because people are able to broadcast. What you can do with Vimeo and GoPro is amazing. You can literally be remote coaching real time, give an athlete some solutions such as like a headpiece. You can talk to them like we're talking now. Simple sound lifts. One of the things that people don't know is that a mic can really enhance the user experience without having a coach to yell. You can learn a lot, observe a lot when someone is able to communicate through voice, but not, and they can project it without yelling because it creates a calming effect, but it's also, you can absorb. So I think those technologies, those simple ones, and polishing those to a mirror on the Apple are going to be a lot more popular because sometimes this good coaching, slightly amplified, is better than all this new tech. Specifically with a lot of these motion capture products that, it's cool to see one of your athletes run around like a skeleton, like, Karate Kid 1 when the Cobra Kai is in their skeletons. But it's not really going to help when you're trying to coach someone to run faster. You can learn more, but it's not really impacting as much as we think. There's a cool factor, a wow factor, but not a big impact. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Is it sexy? Is it useful? Can it be both? And then the other part of it is like you're collecting all this information and
Yeah.
there's different platforms. There's different ways to compile this and to create data visualizations. And what
Yeah.
has been your experience with those types of products where people are collecting all this stuff and have a central sort of receptacle for it?
Very important to have an athlete management system. Very important to have strength and conditioning software. Sets and reps are much more important than, seeing some sort of report. Again, if they're not using player tracking, in as a coach, do you really think they're going to look at some sort of PDF that's showing some sort of scatter plot? So I'm not a huge fan of reporting. I think reporting is just basically ornamental bragging for the team to show that they're doing something. But usually very few people make decisions off of a lot of these super charts and a lot of these visualizations. I do think that sometimes infographics with those data pieces is a great way to move people to uh, a paradigm shift. But I think it's easy to collect data and display data and even analyze it. It's really the interventions and what you do after the interventions to weigh the impact and strategy of your training program. So again, you should have one, but they're just basically incrementally moving the needle rather than helping us really, really make a radical change.
And I hope we're coming out of this whole COVID situation. But has there been some things that you've learned during this past year? And we're coming up to almost a year now. Are there some things that have emerged or accelerated from a technology point of view that you think are going to stick with us and really endure beyond COVID?
Not much. I mean, you've already seen this with when everyone went on Zoom. You're like, what's changed for you? So video conferencing, remote work is probably going to change a little bit. Sometimes it's okay to send out a remote workout. So I think working from home and remote training is going to grow, but it's still the live experience is going to be even more important because people are deciding when they actually decide to do something or live somewhere, what's that user experience going to be like? So I don't think much is going to change. I do think that we're going to start seeing a better access to talent. So I think coaches are going to say, hey, we just want to work with the best people. We don't care what continent they're on. I think we're going to see a lot more collaboration that way. I do think that technology is going to basically go through a little bit of a bubble because people are going to start to realize that it's better to hire a good practitioner and hire more people than to spend more time using equipment and facilities that really don't deliver the goods. I think you're going to see a lot more flexible and agile facility design, and I think that's where going to be the changes. These current practices that are going on right now. I think we're gonna have some stabilization on where things are, but I think the big shift is probably acquiring talent and working collaboratively rather than the new athlete tracking or the new wearable.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Just in terms of people probably valuing the in-person experience more, and maybe saying, "Hey, I'm going to put away the phone and I'm going to actually engage a bit more in the session that I have with you." So that's a really good point.
Unplugging is going to be the new 2.0, where the anti technology or the etiquette of technology, I think, is going to catch up. People's attention, um, moving away from distractions or that anxiety that you have because you're getting all this information fed I mean, right now, I mean, I haven't been on a video conference call in a long time, because why would I want to be on a video conference call trying to get all that digital eye strain and excessive concentration when you just used to using a phone? And then screens. How many people are looking at a tiny screen when they could be looking at, a large flat screen? Like I said, Zoom fatigue is real because it's usually the device. But how many people binge on Netflix? Well, you're not binging on a smartphone usually. Usually, you're on your couch and a large flat screen. So there's going to be some etiquette changes to technology, and it's overdue.
Yeah, very good point. How can people follow you, Carl, so that they can stay on top of some of the things that you're covering and some of the projects you're doing?
Easiest thing to do is to sign up for my newsletter. Go to spikesonly.com, sign up. We're redoing a couple things so that it can be a little bit more informative. And then always use Twitter, because Twitter, I'm making sure I'm sharing and retweeting and giving some opinions on this. And, Spikes Only on Twitter is my handle. And, always just shoot me a line and, see what I can do to help.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this, and hopefully in the in the near future I can meet you in person again and we can share some thoughts, because this I am getting a bit of fatigue here.
Yeah, I think hopefully by this fall, uh, the changes, including the vaccine, will improve our state of this pandemic. Time will tell. But again, thanks for your time as well. You've always been cutting edge on your technology. I remember you using Kubios to get HRV in mid 2000s. So those old days of the polar.
It's getting harder and harder as I'm getting older to stay on top of things, but again, it's all about your network and learning from others. So, thank you for doing that for a lot of people.
All right, thank you, Derek, and I appreciate your time as well.
Take care.